Alright. Okay. So, it's early in the morning. It's not light out yet. And I'm gonna talk about the Netflix Marvel Cinematic Universe, particularly with Luke Cage, which I just saw all of recently. Marathoned it all weekend, and it took till, oh God, what day is it? Tuesday, so Monday. So the weekend to end Monday, and I watched the whole show. And I want to talk about it, because it was in the chat. Alright. Did I say I watched it last night? Because I was up very late watching it, and now it's very early, and I'm very sleepy. But it was a good show. It was well worth it. I mean, that's the Netflix thing these days. It's they make a show, stay up really late for 3 days and watch an entire season of something, and that's how it works. And there are cats here yelling at me. Alright. I'm going to make this spoiler free. I mean, if I want to do spoilers, I'll do it in some other video. Cats are so crazy this morning. Alright, Luke Cage. And the Netflix Cinematic Universe. Netflix, Marvel, and this is not turning out to be a great morning for recording. Where was I? The Marvel Netflix Cinematic Universe. A couple interesting observations, I thought, on my part. One, the villain problem that kind of plagues MCU movies. The villain problem, let's explain. One of the problems with Marvel movies is their villains tend to have, at times, paper-thin motivations. They don't seem very fleshed out. They die at the end of the movie. It's not a complex and engaging character, and it tends to follow a lot of cliches. The villain, the bad guy who wants vengeance, craves vengeance, the bad guy who's crazy, and pretty simple stuff, or spurned lover type guy. I mean, it's a very, very thin motivations for a lot of characters. I don't think it's a coincidence that Tom Hiddleston's character Loki has appeared in 1, 2, 3, and now he's going to be in Dark World in the next one, Ragnarok. So 4. He's been in 3, going to be in 4 of those. Shit, he's been in more of them than some of the other characters. I don't think that's a coincidence. Netflix Marvel movies, Marvel series, don't have this problem. Every Netflix villain I've seen, really every one, has been extraordinarily fleshed out. I'm very tired. This is the weirdest morning. Okay, so particularly how this pertains to Luke Cage. Fleshed out villains. Luke Cage in particular, more than anyone, any series I've seen so far, the villains are really fleshed out. The initial villain, Cottonmouth, is a bad guy, but we see all of his motivations. He explains absolutely everything. He's a complex character. He has a lot of influences, very sympathetic, and usually so. We saw some of this with Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin in Daredevil. I was actually kind of hoping he'd make a bit of an appearance in this one, and spoilers, he doesn't. That's not really much of a spoiler. There's no reason for him to be in it. So fair is fair. But he's not the only one. There are quite a few villains in this, quite a few bad guys. And honestly, this series tells as much about... It's as much an origin story for Luke Cage as it is for the bad guys. It just does a very good job of that. The MCU villain problem is a problem because it's not enough to have engaging, heroic characters in fighting paper targets. We need to meet. The conflict has to have some sort of... The conflict just can't be guys punching each other. That's boring. That's stupid. Unless there's some meaning to it. Then, without that, you just have the Star Wars prequels, where amazing stuff is going on with little or no context and no emotional punch behind it. So it's like, oh, this is really pretty, but who cares about any of it, or any of these characters? Opposite thing here. Much less of a budget, but they did a very good job with it. Worth mentioning, while I was watching this show when I started watching on Saturday, at one point, like, the site shut down. Like, Netflix actually shut down, and I'm like, oh great, my internet connection again, blah blah blah. That was not the case. Netflix actually broke. The website actually broke. And it was Luke Cage. Luke Cage is so powerful, he broke Netflix with one punch. And I see it. It was a very engaging show. It was the right show that the Marvel Netflix universe needed. Okay, let's go through this. There have been 3 shows so far. 2 seasons of Daredevil, Alias, which is Jessica Jones, and now Luke Cage. So, only counting 2 seasons of Daredevil, 4 entries. And each one has its place, and they fit together well. Or rather, there are 4 elements. Let's say 3 elements. 3 elements. And when we take them separately, they're their own thing. They're all engaging. They all stand very, very well by themselves. They don't need the other shows, but they have call-outs to each other to link them together. But taken as a whole, these 3 shows each have a place. You can see a place for them to fit together. Never mind the characters who wander from one show to another. There are a couple of those, and they're great. But more than that, it's going through that. Daredevil. Let's start there. I'm so sleepy. Daredevil. When I started watching Daredevil, the first season, I was like, this show is so much different than anything else, which is interesting. Because now that we've seen Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, Daredevil's sort of the normal one. It's sort of the most like a comic book movie. It's anchor. That's where it sort of rests in relation to the other 2 now. Like, it's the most like a comic book TV show. It's very different. It's very, very interesting. But it is the closest so far that we've had to a normal, like, superhero, action-y sort of thing. After Daredevil, you had Jessica Jones, which was a magnifying glass onto the psyche of this woman who'd been controlled and abused, I think, for like over a year in the show. So, where Daredevil was more of a normal show, it had a fairly large cast, a decent-sized cast, and focused on the neighborhood and the interactions. different people in the place, trying to flesh out Hell's Kitchen as a location. Jessica Jones didn't as much. It took place in New York City, but it didn't go that far to establish the locale. It was more about the characters, and very specifically about Jessica Jones. Kilgrave by David Tennant was great, but and it was just a wonderful take on all these characters, but it was very much characterization, with like I said, the focus purely being on the psyche of Jessica Jones, very specifically the aftermath of her experiences with Kilgrave the previous year. Luke Cage, moving to that. Luke Cage has a different place. It's about Luke Cage, but it's as much about the neighborhood, where Jessica Jones was very focused on the one character, the one aspect of this one character. And Luke Cage is sort of the opposite. It focused as much on the neighborhood as anything else, like the neighborhood, the community. And that's very interesting, particularly for Power Man, a superhero show. That's a cool way of doing it. And then Daredevil's kind of halfway in between, where it establishes the locale and people and so on. But that's not purely its focus. It doesn't spend too much time there, where Luke Cage spends quite a bit of time in that aspect. That was very interesting too. A generational, sort of, with Mama Mabel, her two kids, who end up being these two people. A lot of family. I mean, it's, like I said, it's the locale, and not just the physical location, the people right here, but also this is a place with history, which is, say, these characters have history, including characters who aren't alive anymore. I think some people will be reluctant to watch this show because it's a Netflix thing. It's a series. It's an entire series that's dropped in your lap. Here you go. Here's 13 episodes. And it's the third show, and one series has had 2 seasons. So this is the 4th series that they've dropped. 4th season of something they've dropped for this Netflix cinematic universe. And I think that can be daunting. One cool thing about this show is it works actually very well out of... For example, if you watch these in reverse order, I think it'd be perfectly fine. You'd be like, oh, that guy, that's where that person came from, or that's how they got involved with stuff, or that's a thing they were talking about when they were talking about the past. So that's a cool aspect. They're interconnected, but not as much so as they could be, or other things like the CW Arrow comes to mind immediately. Arrow and Flash. It's the most sedate review ever. Last part of my reviews is generally, what are the odds you'll see this and not like it? And I would have said very low. But now, the show did actually break Netflix for like a couple hours. So clearly the answer is very, very low. A lot of people were watching it. I don't know if it broke records. I'll have to look into that because that's very interesting. Odds you'll see this and not like it. Real low. It's if you've gotten so far as that you're going to watch an entire series, and it's Netflix, you're going to watch it probably over the course of at most a week or so, if not less. That said, there are a few things that were like kind of hokey. Although complaining about that, not to pick on this show, it's it's a series and it's about superheroes. So they ended up, each of them have ended up with little goofy elements here and there. I love Daredevil to death, but the very last episode has a scene where he's like kind of showing off his new gear and his new outfit, and it's kind of like a little too much of a toy advertisement. Luke Cage has a couple moments where it's like, it's a little too much. We're learning an important lesson about love and tolerance and community, and it just gets too lectury. All the other seasons have done that. The other series have done that too. It's a little distracting and off-putting. Because it's a cliche. But other than that, the show was excellent. I thought it was amazing. Odd, you'll like it, you'll see it and not like it. 1 in 10 at best. I'll say 1 in 10. I mean, there are a few things there that I guess would put some people off, because it isn't very superhero-y. Like I said, Daredevil's the closest. This one's probably the furthest, not by a lot. Alias, Jessica Jones is pretty far from being a standard superhero show too. Would I watch it again? Yes, I would. I would like to, actually. I need some time. I need time, though. This is a long-ass thing. All the series are. I rewatched Daredevil Season 2 just to get more of John Berthol's... Berthol? Is that his last name? Punisher. More Punisher. I wanted more Punisher. And this show... Well, likewise, mostly the villains are very sympathetic. Like, I'm kind of not rooting for the bad guys. I want the good guys to win, but it's like, I want to see them do well. There were bad guys and badder guys. It's very interesting. Tells the origin story of them at least as much as Luke Cage. And it sets up Defenders very well. Very, very well. So, yeah, I'll watch this again. I'd like to, actually. I might do that next week. That's all. I'm super sleepy. I'm out.